Welcome to Bovine Banter with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team. I'm Carly Becker, and I'm a dairy educator based in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Joining us today is Dr. Ken Griswold. Thank you for joining us today, Ken. But before we get started, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what you do now?
Thank you, Carly. So I work in the dairy industry. I'm a ruminant technical manager for Selco USA. I provide technical services for our sales team across the United States.
Great. And in your career in the dairy industry, what all have you done in the past as well?
So I've been in the dairy industry for over 30 years now, and either in feeding cows for different feed companies or in working for cooperative extension or on faculty at different universities. I actually was in your role back from 2004 until 2011. So I know a little bit about Lancaster County.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. So this is our 12th season of Bovine Banter, and we thought it would be good to cover some farm safety topics. So today we're going to be focusing on silo gases and silo safety. I've heard from other dairy educators that have been with Penn State Extension for a while and were co-workers with you back in the past that you had a bit of a run-in with some silo gas poisoning. You were doing a lot of corn silage research at the time. So could you please talk a little bit about that experience with us?
Sure. So in 2009 and 2010, I was conducting field research looking at dry matter losses in corn silage in different storage structures, whether they were upright silos or bunker silos. And we were conducting this research to try to utilize or understand what we needed to do in bunker silos to improve the quality of the silage that we were producing. The gold standard for silage preservation is still an upright silo as long as it's in good condition. And so we were using the upright silos as a control in that situation to compare against the bunker silos. The way we were conducting the research, we were taking green chopped corn during the harvest process and putting it into nylon weave bags. And those nylon weave bags were then put into the silo as the silo was filled. And then we would go back later and retrieve those bags to look at how much dry matter was lost from those bags over time in those silos. The upright silos that we used were on Amish dairies because the Amish actually do not use an electrical unloader. And if they did use an electrical unloader, the bag would be destroyed before we knew we got to it. But because they forked the silage out of the silo, we could go in and find the bags once they found the marker for the bag. So we had been doing this work for over 2 years when the silo gas incident happened. September 7th, 2010, and it was actually the last set of bags that I needed to put into a silo that we were going to do at all. This was the last final set. And it was at the very top of the silo. So the silo they started filling the silo on a Thursday. I put a set of bags into the bottom that morning on Thursday. They filled the silo. I came back on Friday, put another set of bags into the silo on Friday. And then I told them that I was going to put a set of bags in when they were done at the very top of the silo. That didn't happen until Tuesday, the following Tuesday. And so the process of putting the bags in the silo, we would stop filling the silo, and then we would leave the blower running to make sure that there was air circulating and being blown into the silo. With that, I would be in a full body harness, and I was roped off to the outside of the silo. And I always had somebody who would watch me go in and make sure that I was okay. They'd be outside the silo watching me the entire time, because if there was any presence of gas, if I was to lose consciousness, whatever, they could then pull me out of the silo. So we felt we were taking precautions all the way through. We had done 7 upright silos, so this was the 7th silo, and we had done 6 bunker silos. The bunker silos, there's no real danger of silo gas there, but in upright silos, because it's a much more closed atmosphere, it can be. So I came back on that Tuesday, the 7th of September, and came in the afternoon about 3:30 and filled the last set of bags. And then I took them actually up the outside of the silo because the silo was so full, I could go in from the outside not through the inner ladder that typically we would use, but the outside ladder. And so I hauled the bags up the outside of the silo, roped myself in, and the blower was going. And the farmer came up and the outside of the silo and watched me as I climbed in and made sure I was there. And then I proceeded to bury those 3 bags in different locations across the face or the surface of the silage. I had to dig down about 3 feet to create a hole to put them in because we were at the very top of the silo at that point. And in doing that, I was in the silo for approximately 7 minutes. I would always time myself just out of habit to make sure that I wasn't in there for a really long period of time. It took me a little bit longer than normal because I had to dig so far to create these holes. So everything was fine. The blower was going, there was air circulating. I felt there was nothing wrong that period of time. I then came down from the silo, and when I got to the bottom of the silo, I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. And I was in fairly good physical shape at that point in time, so I didn't think there was anything too out of the ordinary. After I cleaned everything up and was leaving, I was about 15 minutes away from the farm, and I still was having I just didn't feel right. Just didn't feel like I was in good shape. And so I actually ended up calling a colleague of mine, Paul Craig, at that point in time on my cell phone. And I said, something's off. And within 10 seconds, he said, "You've been exposed to silage gas." And I said, "No, we had the blower going. Everything was fine." He said, "No, I think you've been exposed." And so I said, "All right." So I made an appointment with my GP for 7 o'clock that evening to go in and see the GP. The GP diagnosed me with just having an asthma attack, and I couldn't convince him otherwise. And he didn't have enough background on what silo gas exposure was like to know. Mm-hmm. And so I went into that appointment. He diagnosed it as an asthma attack. I gave me some medicine, and I've been an asthmatic all my life. I didn't think it was an asthma attack. I went home, and by 10 o'clock that night, I was having difficulty breathing to the point where I didn't feel comfortable laying down to go to sleep. So I went downstairs into our living room, sat in the lazy boy, and proceeded to fall asleep. Around midnight, I woke up, and I started coughing up pink foamy phlegm. And I knew at that point in time that I was in real trouble. However, had lost enough oxygen, I wasn't thinking clearly, that I didn't feel like I thought that I needed to wake up my wife before I called for help. And so it took me about an hour, a little over an hour, to crawl across the room and up the stairs and wake up my wife before calling the ambulance. And it was really difficult, just trying to breathe and coughing up mucus and phlegm and so forth. Luckily, when we called the 911, one of my neighbors actually was the first one to respond, and he was there within a few minutes, and they got me hooked up on oxygen, gave me an IV, put me in the ambulance, and took me to the hospital. And so within 15 minutes, after I left my house, I was sitting in the ER in Lancaster General. However, the ER doctors did not know what silo gas was. They had no real understanding of it. So they called the pulmonologist. The pulmonologist recognized the symptoms and came in and they established me on heavy duty anti-inflammatories and then a CPAP machine on full bore, 100% oxygen. And I spent the next 3 days in the ICU trying to recover my breathing. And then I came out of that and had 2 days just in a normal room. And I left after 5 days, and everybody thought it was fine. They put me on some steroids to keep the inflammation down in my lungs, and then started weaning me off over the next 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, I was at home, and we had just gotten done with a picnic outside in our backyard. And I started coughing up blood again. And so my wife and I went back to the hospital. We found a different pulmonologist who had actually treated silo gas before. They put me on heavy duty anti-inflammatories, and I was in the hospital for another 8 days to recover my lung capacity. At the end of those 8 days, I came back and left the hospital, and was very fortunate that I had very little actual lung capacity loss from the incident, and they kept me on heavy duty steroids for the next 6 months and then wean me off over another 3-month period. The steroid use itself was very detrimental to my body, but I'm fortunate to be able to sit here and have this discussion with you. So it was a scary experience. There's no doubt. I'm fortunate to be sitting here and having this conversation. And silo gas is not something to take lightly.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That is very scary. I know other coworkers had talked about your experience before, and I had no idea it was that serious.
It was serious. There's no doubt. Yes.
I guess for that first doctor's visit when you went to your general practitioner, is there
Mhm.
anything that maybe you would have said differently or maybe been more assertive towards them?
Oh no, I explained exactly what happened to me.
Okay.
I told him exactly what silo gas was. I knew exactly when I'd been exposed. He just did not have the experience to know what was going on, nor did he think that I was correct in my diagnosis. And
Yeah.
the same was true for the ER doctors that were there. At least they recognized they didn't know, and they contacted an actual pulmonologist. But it's something that's rare enough now as an occurrence that doctors do not have the experience and know how to treat it. So, and you're talking about Lancaster County, where there's a large population that use upright silos. And so the opportunity for this to happen is greater. In the 70s and 80s, when they first recognized silo gas as an issue, there was a lot more training that went on with doctors to recognize that and understand it and so forth. But I think just the changes that we've had over the years have not made the doctors realize how much they need to know about this condition.
I had heard someone talking about that they were going to increase the training of doctors in ag heavy areas. So
Mhm.
maybe they would, because I know just this past year in Pennsylvania, there have been a few deaths due to silo gas poisoning.
Yeah, silo gas is really difficult. There's a lot of different reasons why it can be a problem. One is most farmers don't think about it very much. It's just part of their daily, having to go up silos and so forth, or open silos or whatever is just part of their daily, what they have to do. And it really does become a part of just complacency that you're just doing this on a regular basis and you don't take the precautions as you should. The precautions just prevent silo gas. You cannot prevent silo gas from happening. Silo gas happens in every fermentation process that takes place with corn silage, alfalfa silage, doesn't matter what the silage is. It's a natural part of it. What you can do is reduce your potential for exposure. The way to think about it is you need to make sure that there's air circulating in the system where you are. And maybe I should back up and do a post-mortem on what happened with me, and then maybe give more insight. The gas formation that we're talking about is the conversion of nitrate in the corn silage to nitrogen dioxide. So instead of CO2, you think about CO2, we breathe O2 and we produce CO2. Well, the nitrate gets converted to nitrogen dioxide. So it's instead of CO2, it's NO2. And the process takes longer. It's not something that happens in the first day or so of fermentation. And actually the maximum level of nitrogen dioxide formation occurs 3 to 5 days after the ensiling process starts. So if you remember what I told you about what happened, they started filling on a Thursday, they filled on Friday, and then they finished filling on Tuesday. Well, that's 5 days later. So the silo, the maximum production of silo gas was occurring in that silage at that point in time. The other thing I didn't tell you about the silo is it wasn't a cement slab silo or stave silo. It was a former harvest store that was converted to an upright silo. And so those are much more sealed, right? And so there's no place for that gas to go through the cracks in the cement or anything like that. It's going to build up in the silage. So when you consider those two things, and then you look at the fact that I was in the silo and I was digging down into the silage, that was fermenting, I was actually digging down into where the gas would be. Even though there was a blower blowing the entire time, moving air around, I was down 3 feet under the surface with my face down in the silage trying to dig this hole out. And so I was probably more exposed. There's two other things to think about. One, nitrate is the source that nitrogen dioxide comes from, the silo gas comes from. It was a drought in the fall that year. And so the nitrate levels in the corn that was being harvested were higher than we would normally anticipate. So there was more nitrate, which would mean there would be more nitrogen dioxide being produced in that situation. And the third thing I think that needs to be taken into account with this is that when we are talking about silo gas exposures, most of them do not happen when you're filling the silo. Most of them happen when the silos are being opened after the fermentation process is complete. So they'll fill the silo and it'll sit for several weeks, and then they may come back to it and open it up.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with that is that the silo gas becomes very concentrated at that point in time. And often if you open up a silo from that period of time, there'll be a yellowish to grayish gas sitting there on top of the silage. That's the concentrated silo gas. So if it's concentrated enough, you'll see it as a yellow to gray gas and sitting there. The idea is if you circulate enough air, you will push air in and push all that gas out, and therefore the exposure would be lessened or eliminated. The challenge is that most of the time, if there's a silo gas exposure, people don't wait long enough for that gas to clear out, and they open up the doors with their face near the door. And so silo gas is heavier. Nitrogen dioxide is heavier, physically heavier than carbon dioxide or oxygen. And so it settles below and to the surface of the silage. When you open that door, it's going to flow all over you, and you're going to get a full blast into you. And silo gas is really a hazard. If you look at the OSHA recommendations or limitations on silo gas is the most potent gas farmers are exposed to in terms of having health effects. Most people have heard of gas in manure pits. That's hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide, the exposure is, you can have exposure of about 20 parts per million for up to 20 minutes of hydrogen sulfide and still be under the OSHA limit. With silo gas, with nitrogen dioxide, it's 5 parts per million for less than 10 minutes. You can't smell 5 parts per million of that gas. You can't see it. And so you have to be aware that it's a very potent gas, and it can do damage to your lungs and really cause a problem.
Yeah, so how long should the blower be running before someone would enter into the silo?
Well, I'm going to use the typical extension response of it all depends, but the minimum I would do is to have it running for at least an hour, push air out or push air in and hopefully push the gas out and so forth. It will depend on how far down from the top of the silo the level of silage is in that scenario, and it'll also depend upon how long the silage has been sitting there in the silo, right? Again, accumulating gas and the fact that it settles, it's going to be at its highest point within the first 3 weeks of after the silage is fermented.
Okay. And you mentioned the year that you were in the silo and were exposed that there was a drought. Are there other situations that may contribute to increased production of silo gases?
Well, we often hear about silo gas incidents more with hay crop silages than we do with corn silage, because the hay crop silages have more protein, they whether it's alfalfa or grasses. And as a part of that, there's also more nitrate that's formed in those plants or contained in those plants. So there's always going to be more nitrogen dioxide formed when you have a fermentation with a hay crop silage than with a corn silage. And so when you hear about silo gas incidents, they typically are happening on haylage silos and less often on corn silage silos.
I think you talked about some of the best practices when entering the silos, but could you just list off a few of those here?
Yeah, first of all, if you have to, first of all, the best practice is not to enter the silo. Okay?
Yes.
Just going to say from the beginning that first practice and best practice is do not enter the silo. And there is no reason for farmer, once he started filling the silo, to go into a silo. Some will go in at the end to level off the silage and so on. But if they plan to go into the silo, the first thing that has to happen is the blower has to be going and going continually for a long period of time, at least an hour, like I said, to make sure that the air is as clear as possible. Second thing they should do, which typically doesn't happen, but they should be in some sort of harness and be roped off so that somebody can pull them out if they are to pass out and so on and so forth. Because you don't want the second person coming into the silo to get you. You want that second person to be on the outside and pulling you out. Thirdly, you need to make sure that somebody does know that you are going into that silo and that they should check. If they're not going to stand outside and watch you, they should check the silo after not more than 15 to 20 minutes to make sure that you're okay in there. Most of the silo incidents that would happen are going to happen in that short period of time if there's going to be an exposure.
Okay. And if someone does think that they've been exposed to silo gas, what should their next steps be?
If they think they've been exposed to silo gas, head for the ER. Don't go to the GP. Go to the ER. Explain to the doctor at the ER if they can verbalize this and so forth. Explain to the doctor in the ER that they've been exposed to silo gas. Tell them exactly what it is, this nitrogen dioxide. If they can tell them how long they have been exposed, do so, and ask them if there's a pulmonologist on call or they're at the hospital that they want to see the pulmonologist and so forth. That's the best thing you can do. The last thing you want to do is actually try to go to sleep, or feel, if you feel sick, is go lay down and go to sleep, because nitrogen dioxide is heavier than CO2. So when you breathe it in, it settles in your lungs. It does not, your lungs have evolved to expel CO2. Your lungs are not evolved to expel NO2. And so the NO2 settles in your lungs. And what happens is that nitrogen dioxide, when it's exposed to the moisture in your lungs, converts to nitric acid. And the nitric acid actually does the damage in your lungs. And what it does is it actually damages the little tubule that connects the alveoli, which is the gas sac, to the rest of the bronchial tubes. And so it basically closes off those alveoli so you can't exchange air. So you can breathe all you want. This is why I said I knew I wasn't having an asthma attack, because I knew I could feel I could move air, but I couldn't catch my breath. With an asthmatic, the bronchial tubes, the larger bronchial tubes, start to close up and so forth. And so it's very difficult to move air in and out. So you hear the wheezing going on. But with a nitrogen dioxide exposure, it's the small tubes that are damaged and become inflamed and close off. You can move air in your bronchial tubes and so forth and feel like you're moving air in and out of your lungs, but you don't catch your breath. Your oxygen gets used up and you're not able to exchange the gas. So it becomes a real difficult situation. And if you look at the literature will tell you that if you breathe nitrogen dioxide and it's not something that makes you unconscious immediately and so forth, the maximum damage to your lung tissue starts at about 10 to 12 hours after your exposure. So if you were exposed like I was in the afternoon, by the time I was at midnight, my lungs were starting to break down. It took a long time for that to really develop and show up. The other thing that happens with nitrogen gas or nitrogen dioxide exposure is the first exposure is bad and it does damage, but then your body actually has a second reaction to that exposure 3 weeks after the first initial exposure. And then it has a third reaction to that exposure 3 months after that. That's why the pulmonologist kept me on the steroids for so long, is because he didn't want my lungs to then re-inflame and so forth later. And so once you get past that third reaction, then your body is able to be okay. The other thing that happens is you become sensitized very quickly because of this process to silo gas in the future. So I'll be very honest with you. I don't go near silos, especially during the harvest season and so forth, at all anymore, just
Mhm.
because of that fact. I don't want another exposure, because if I get exposed again, it's going to be much more detrimental than it was the first time.
Have you had any like long-term effects that maybe could be attributed to this exposure, or are you all in the clear now?
My lungs are fine. I'm, like I said, I'm extremely lucky in that I lost very little lung capacity in the process. However, the long-term use of the steroids is what's been done the damage to my body. So long-term use of steroids, especially the heavy doses that they had me on, so they strip calcium from your body. So I've had a lot of problems with like my teeth,
Mm.
and so on, and my joints and so forth after that. And so those are the long-term issues that I've had with it. But people who are not treated, they've been exposed to silage gas, and I've met several, they lose lung capacity, and that's really detrimental over the long term and so forth, and their ability to do things around the farm and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and this is a very serious issue. So we're just trying to get the message out to as many people as possible through podcasts and fact sheets, etc. Penn State Extension is doing a lot of work with farm safety
Mm-hmm.
measures. Do you have any last minute takeaway messages that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, silo safety in general is something that we need to pay attention to. It's probably one of the most dangerous times on the farm, is being around a silo, and regardless of if it's an upright silo or a bunker silo or even bags, handling silage and working around silage is not safe unless you really practice the safety practices that you have to have. And I think people need to understand that the complacency that we have because we work around it every day is what's going to cost us in the long run. So you can't be complacent in these situations, especially if you think about it, the number of young kids that are running around farms and so forth. Silo gas, again, like I said, is heavier than air, right? So it settles. So there have been times that have been shown that the animals in the barns have either died or lost or been injured because of silo gas coming down from the silo and settling in the barn. So if you're going to think about this, first thing is ventilation, making sure everything's ventilated really well during those harvest periods and so on and so forth. Secondly, stay out of the silo completely if you can do it, and so on, and make sure that people know what you're doing so that they can get you out of the silo if necessary.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and for talking with us about everything today. And if you have any further questions regarding this topic, you can email me at cab7033@psu.edu. And don't forget to tune into our next episode next Tuesday, where Dr. Lisa Holden will be talking with another farmer about a farm safety issue. Have a great week.